My ex-husband's new wife tried to relocate my son to Portugal without telling me, and now demands I sign over custody. I found out Bianca was planning to take my son Oliver to Portugal when the school secretary called about missing documents. We need his birth certificate for the student visa application, she said. Mrs. Hutchinson submitted everything except that. I'm Mrs. Hutchinson, have been for 8 years before the divorce and kept the name for Oliver. Bianca is Mrs. Torres Hutchinson for exactly 11 months. What student visa? I asked. That's how I learned my ex-husband Kyle and his new wife had enrolled Oliver in an international school in Lisbon starting September. They'd paid the $15,000 deposit, signed a lease on an apartment, even bought Oliver new uniforms with the school crest. Never mentioned a word to me. Kyle and I divorced 3 years ago after he cheated with his personal trainer. Not Bianca, someone before her. We had 50-50 custody, worked out schedules peacefully, never fought about Oliver. I thought we were doing divorced parenting right. Kyle met Bianca at a wine tasting 10 months after our divorce. She was 26, owned a travel blog, called herself a digital nomad, had 45,000 Instagram followers and no actual job. They married 8 months later in a ceremony Oliver and I weren't invited to. Fine by me. But Bianca immediately started overstepping, called herself Oliver's bonus mom, showed up to parent-teacher conferences, posted photos of Oliver on her travel blog without permission. I kept my mouth shut because Oliver seemed happy. That ended with the Portugal phone call. I drove straight to Kyle's house. Bianca answered wearing designer workout clothes that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. Oh, you heard, she said, actually smiling. Isn't it exciting? Oliver's going to experience authentic European culture, not this suburban wasteland. Behind her, I could see boxes labeled Oliver's room, Lisboa. They'd been packing his things. Kyle appeared looking guilty but trying to play confident. We were going to tell you once everything was finalized, he said. Bianca got an amazing opportunity to partner with Portuguese tourism boards. It's just for a year. A year? I stayed calm even though my hands were shaking. You're taking my son to another country for a year? Our son, Bianca corrected. And it's hardly another country. Portugal is very civilized. They have excellent schools. Better than here, actually. That's when she pulled out the papers. Custody modification agreements. Already filled out. Just needed my signature. This makes sense for everyone, she said. You're always complaining about juggling work and parenting. Now you can focus on your career while we give Oliver proper cultural exposure. I took the papers and left without signing. That night, I called my brother-in-law Stephen, who happens to be a federal prosecutor. Told him everything. He made one phone call. Turns out attempting to remove a child from the country without both parents' consent is attempted parental kidnapping. The next morning, 2 federal agents showed up at Kyle's office. Not to arrest him, just to ask questions about the Portugal situation. Loud enough for his colleagues to hear. They asked about the apartment lease, the school enrollment, the plane tickets already purchased for next month. Kyle called me screaming an hour later. You involved the feds? Are you insane? You tried to steal my son, I said. Consider yourself lucky they're just asking questions. But I wasn't done. See, Bianca's travel blog was her whole identity. Those 45,000 followers were everything to her. She made maybe $2,000 a month from sponsorships, but acted like she was running an empire. The Portuguese tourism board deal was her biggest break, worth $50,000 plus expenses. So I called my friend Louise, who works in international tourism marketing. Asked her to look into Bianca's engagement rates. Turns out 30,000 of her followers were purchased bots from click farms. Her actual engagement rate was below 2%. Industry standard for her follower count should be 8% minimum. Louise happened to mention this at an industry conference in Miami. Word got around to the Portuguese tourism board. They pulled Bianca's contract within 48 hours. But the best part came during the emergency custody hearing Stephen helped me file. Bianca showed up in a Portugal soccer jersey thinking it was cute. The judge was not amused. Mrs. Torres Hutchinson, the judge said, reading from Bianca's submitted statement, you wrote that the biological mother is holding Oliver back from life-changing experiences. Can you elaborate? Bianca stood up eagerly. Oliver deserves more than strip malls and chain restaurants. In Portugal, he'd learn about real culture. Art, history, proper food. Not this American mediocrity his mother's content with. I see, Judge Robertson said. And what languages do you speak? English and some Spanish from college. Portuguese? I was going to learn with Oliver. Total immersion is the best way. The judge turned to me. Do you speak Portuguese? No, I admitted. But I'm not trying to move him there either. Judge Robertson looked at Kyle. Mr. Hutchinson, were you planning to move to Portugal as well? Kyle shifted nervously. I was going to visit monthly. My job is here. So your plan, the judge said slowly, was to send your 8-year-old son to a foreign country where he doesn't speak the language, with a stepmother he's known for less than a year, while you stay here for work? The courtroom went silent, quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. Alyssa stood up beside me and opened her folder, pulling out a thick stack of papers. She walked them over to the judge and placed them carefully on the bench. Judge Robertson picked up the first page and started reading while Alyssa explained what she was presenting. School volunteer sign-in sheets showing I'd helped in Oliver's classroom every other Wednesday for the past 2 years. Medical appointment records with my signature on every form, every vaccination, every checkup since he was born. Email chains with his teachers about homework struggles and social concerns. Photos of science fair projects we'd built together at our kitchen table. Field trip permission slips. Parent-teacher conference notes in my handwriting. Birthday party invitations I'd organized. Soccer practice schedules I'd coordinated. The judge flipped through page after page, her expression getting more serious with each one. Alyssa pulled out another section showing Bianca's involvement. Exactly 3 parent-teacher conferences in 11 months. 0 medical appointments. No volunteer hours. 1 field trip where she'd posted Instagram photos instead of helping supervise. The contrast sat there on the judge's bench in black and white, impossible to ignore. Judge Robertson picked up another folder and opened it slowly. Oliver's report cards from the past 3 years. Straight A's in reading and math. Teacher comments about his kindness to other students. Awards for perfect attendance. Photos from the school art show where his painting won 2nd place. She spread the papers across her bench and looked at Kyle over the top of her reading glasses. She asked him what specific problems existed with Oliver's current school that required moving him to another country. Kyle opened his mouth, but nothing came out right away. He glanced at Edward Penn, who nodded at him to answer. Kyle said something about better opportunities and exposure to different cultures. The judge waited. Kyle added that the international school had smaller class sizes. Judge Robertson asked if Oliver was struggling in his current classes. Kyle admitted he wasn't. She asked if Oliver had behavior problems or social difficulties. Kyle said no, he was doing great, actually. The judge set down the report cards and folded her hands. She said that disrupting a child who was thriving academically and socially required more than vague ideas about better opportunities. She said that philosophical preferences about European versus American education didn't justify uprooting an 8-year-old from everything he knew. Kyle tried to explain about the cultural benefits again, but his voice got quieter as he talked. Bianca leaned forward like she wanted to interrupt, but Edward Penn put his hand on her arm to stop her. The judge asked Kyle if he'd discussed any concerns about Oliver's education with his teachers. Kyle said no. She asked if he'd researched the Portuguese school's curriculum or teaching methods. Kyle admitted he'd mostly let Bianca handle those details. Judge Robertson looked at the paperwork again and shook her head slightly. She said that making major life decisions for a child required more than letting someone else handle the details. She said it required actual thought about what was best for that specific child, not what sounded exciting or impressive. Edward Penn stood up and cleared his throat. He said that while the Portugal plan might have been poorly communicated, Kyle still had equal rights as a custodial parent. He said that both parents should have input into major decisions about Oliver's education and future. Judge Robertson looked at him and said that was exactly her point. She said equal custody meant both parents had to agree on major decisions. She pulled out our custody agreement and read directly from it. The part about requiring mutual written consent for any relocation beyond 50 miles. The part about both parents participating in decisions about education, medical care, and religious upbringing. She asked Edward Penn if his client had obtained mutual written consent before enrolling Oliver in a Portuguese school. Edward Penn said they'd planned to. The judge said planning to get consent after paying deposits and signing leases wasn't the same as actually getting consent first. Judge Robertson called for a 15-minute recess. The bailiff told everyone to remain seated while she left the courtroom. I stood up on shaky legs, and Alyssa guided me out into the hallway. My hands were still trembling, so I shoved them in my pockets. Alyssa smiled at me for the first time all day. She said this was going better than she'd hoped. She said the judge was clearly bothered by how Kyle and Bianca had acted. Stephen appeared from wherever he'd been sitting in the back. He came over and put his hand on my shoulder. He said Judge Robertson looked disturbed by their whole attitude. He said the way they'd treated parental consent like an annoying formality instead of a legal requirement wasn't sitting well. I asked if that meant I'd keep custody. Alyssa said nothing was guaranteed, but the judge's questions were pointing in the right direction. We stood in the hallway while other people from other cases walked past us. I watched Kyle and Bianca through the courtroom window. They were talking intensely with Edward Penn. Bianca kept gesturing with her hands. Kyle had his head down. The bailiff called us back in after 12 minutes instead of 15. Everyone took their seats and the room went quiet again. Judge Robertson came back in and sat down. She didn't waste time. She said she was ordering an immediate temporary modification to the custody arrangement. She said I would have primary physical custody of Oliver effective immediately. Kyle's face went white. He leaned forward like he might stand up, but Edward Penn grabbed his arm. Bianca actually gasped out loud. Not a quiet gasp either. A shocked sound that made several people turn to look at her. She stared at the judge with her mouth open. Judge Robertson kept reading from her notes. She said Kyle would maintain parenting time but with modifications. She said the existing schedule would continue but with new restrictions. No travel outside our state without my explicit written consent. No changes to Oliver's school or residence without court approval. She said these restrictions would remain in place until a full custody evaluation could be completed. Judge Robertson said she couldn't trust the current arrangement to stay stable. She said the evidence showed Kyle had planned to remove Oliver from the country without proper consent. She said that demonstrated poor judgment and disregard for both the custody order and Oliver's mother's rights. She said the court had to protect Oliver's interests first. She said that meant ensuring he remained in his stable, familiar environment, while professionals evaluated what permanent arrangement would serve him best. Bianca whispered something to Kyle, but the courtroom was quiet enough that I heard her say, "This wasn't fair." The judge looked up sharply. She reminded everyone that this was a legal proceeding, not a negotiation. She said fairness meant following the law and protecting children's well-being. She said adults who made unilateral decisions about children's lives shouldn't be surprised when court stepped in. Judge Robertson said she was appointing May Browning to do the custody evaluation. She said May was a child psychologist with 20 years of experience in family court cases. She said May would interview Oliver, both parents and any other relevant family members. She said May would observe parent-child interactions and review all the evidence. She said the evaluation would take approximately 6 weeks. She set a follow-up hearing for the first week of October. She said at that hearing she would review May's findings and determine what permanent custody modifications were appropriate. She told both attorneys to provide May with all necessary documentation. She told Kyle and me that we were required to cooperate fully with the evaluation process. Then she banged her gavel and said court was adjourned. Bianca stood up fast and started walking toward me. Alyssa moved between us before Bianca got close. Alyssa said firmly that all communication needed to go through attorneys from now on. Bianca stopped and looked confused. She said she just wanted to explain something. Alyssa repeated that all communication goes through attorneys. Bianca looked at Kyle for support, but he was still sitting down, staring at the table in front of him. Edward Penn came over and guided Bianca back toward their side of the courtroom. She kept looking back at me like she couldn't understand what had just happened. Like she'd walked into court expecting everyone to agree with her plans and couldn't process that the judge had shut her down completely. She still didn't get it. Still didn't understand that you can't just take someone's kid to another country because you think you know better. I grabbed my purse and followed Alyssa out of the courtroom. Stephen walked with us down the courthouse steps. The August heat hit me as soon as we got outside. I called my sister from the parking lot and told her I was coming to get Oliver. She said he'd been asking questions all morning. She said she'd told him everything was fine, but he knew something big was happening. I drove to her house going exactly the speed limit even though I wanted to floor it. My hands had stopped shaking, but my whole body felt wound tight. I kept thinking about Oliver's face when I'd dropped him off that morning, how he'd asked if I was mad at him, how I'd promised this wasn't his fault. My sister opened the door before I could knock. Oliver was sitting on her couch playing with his tablet. He looked up when I came in and his whole face changed. He ran over and I caught him and held him so tight. I told him he was staying with me for a while. He pulled back and asked if he was in trouble. I knelt down so we were eye level and told him none of this was his fault. I told him that grown-ups had to work some things out, but he hadn't done anything wrong. He asked about Dad. I said he'd still see Dad, but things were going to be a little different for a bit. He nodded and asked if he could bring his Legos. I said he could bring whatever he wanted. We drove back to my house and Oliver ran straight to his room to get his favorite Legos. I sat on the couch and stared at my phone. 17 missed calls from Kyle, all within an hour. I didn't listen to the voicemails. Didn't need to. I could picture him pacing his apartment, getting more desperate with each unanswered ring. My phone buzzed with a text. Kyle asking if we could talk, asking to work this out. I forwarded the message to Alyssa like she'd told me to do. Everything goes through the lawyers now. Everything becomes part of the record. Oliver came back downstairs dragging his Lego bin and asking if he could build on the coffee table. I said yes, even though I usually made him use the floor. He dumped out the pieces and started sorting them by color like he always did. I watched him work and felt my chest get tight. Kyle had been ready to pack all this up and ship it to another country. Ready to take Oliver away from his room, his school, his friends, his whole life. The next morning my phone rang while I was making Oliver breakfast. The school principal. She asked if I could come in for a meeting. Kyle had shown up at the school office an hour earlier demanding to check Oliver out. The secretary told him he couldn't without my permission given the new custody order. Kyle got loud, started saying the court had no right to keep him from his son. The principal had to call security to escort him out. She wanted to make sure everyone understood the pickup rules now. I told her I'd be there in an hour. I dropped Oliver at the school and watched him run to his classroom. His teacher waved at me through the window. Normal morning, regular day. Except Kyle had been here earlier trying to take him. I walked to the main office and the principal was waiting. She had copies of the temporary custody order spread across her desk. I gave her fresh copies anyway. Updated the emergency contact list. Removed Kyle's mom and sister since they'd probably help him if he asked. Added my sister and Stephen instead. The principal made notes in Oliver's file. She said the secretary who called me about the visa felt terrible about the whole thing. I told her that call probably saved Oliver from being stuck in another country. The principal nodded and said she'd make sure all the teachers knew about the pickup restrictions. I thanked her and left. 3 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Woman's voice. Professional but warm. May Browning. The child psychologist Judge Robertson appointed. She wanted to schedule my evaluation session. She explained her process. Separate interviews with each parent. Watching how we interact with Oliver. Talking to Oliver himself in ways that made sense for an 8-year-old. She said her job was figuring out what worked best for Oliver. Not punishing anyone. Just finding the right arrangement. We scheduled my session for the following Tuesday. She'd come to my house around 4 so she could see me and Oliver together during our normal routine. I spent the next few days trying not to think about it. Trying not to clean my house too much or plan out what we'd do. May said she wanted to see normal, natural, how things actually were. Tuesday came and May showed up right at 4. She was younger than I expected. Maybe 35. Wore jeans and a cardigan. Carried a leather bag instead of a briefcase. She shook my hand and said she appreciated me making time. We sat at my kitchen table and she pulled out a notepad. Asked about my parenting approach, Oliver's daily routines, his friendships at the school, his relationship with Kyle before all this happened, how I'd handled the divorce, how we'd managed co-parenting. I told her the truth, that it had been hard at first, but we'd figured it out, that Kyle and I actually did pretty well sharing custody until Bianca came along, that I'd kept my mouth shut about a lot of Bianca's overstepping because Oliver seemed happy. May wrote everything down, asked about my work schedule, how I handled sick days and school events, what Oliver and I did together. I told her about homework at the kitchen table, movie nights on Fridays, swimming lessons on Saturdays, normal stuff, regular life. Oliver got home from my sister's house around 5 and May watched us together. Watched me help him with his math homework. Watched us make dinner, spaghetti with meatballs, Oliver's favorite. He talked the whole time about his day at the school, about the book they were reading in class, about his friend Joshua who brought in his pet hamster for show and tell. May sat at the counter taking notes while Oliver showed her his room, his artwork taped to the walls, his shelf of books, his collection of rocks from our camping trip last summer. He seemed comfortable with her, not nervous, just excited to show someone his stuff. 2 days later, Kyle had his evaluation session with May. Alyssa texted me the scheduling update. Said Bianca tried to come to the session even though May specifically said it was for Kyle alone. May had to ask Bianca to wait outside. Apparently Bianca didn't take it well. Stood in the hallway making phone calls loud enough for everyone to hear. Alyssa said the whole thing was a bad look for Kyle. Made it obvious Bianca controlled everything. Made it clear Kyle couldn't even do a custody evaluation without her hovering. I heard through mutual friends that things were falling apart between Kyle and Bianca. Bianca was furious about Portugal. Blamed Kyle for not handling me better. Said he should have just taken Oliver without telling me. That I'd have gotten over it eventually. Kyle apparently told a friend he was starting to see Bianca differently. Starting to realize her judgment wasn't great. That maybe rushing into marriage with someone he barely knew hadn't been his smartest move. The friend said Kyle looked exhausted. Said his apartment was a mess. Said Bianca was barely speaking to him except to complain. Stephen called on Friday afternoon. The federal inquiry was officially closed. No charges since Kyle hadn't actually taken Oliver out of the country. But the investigation record was still available for family court. Stephen said the whole point was making Kyle understand how serious this was. Making him see that attempting to relocate a child without consent wasn't just a co-parenting disagreement. It was a federal crime. The message got through. Kyle hadn't tried to contact me directly since that first night. Hadn't shown up at my house. Hadn't tried anything stupid. Louise called the next day with an update. Word had spread through the tourism industry about Bianca's fake followers. Several brands quietly ended their partnerships with her. Her Instagram following dropped to around 30,000 as she stopped buying bots. Her engagement rates stayed terrible. Real people weren't interested in her content. Without the fake numbers, she was just another travel blogger with mediocre photos and boring captions. Louise said Bianca's career was basically over. No legitimate brand would work with someone who'd been caught buying followers. The Portugal Tourism Board deal had been her shot and she'd blown it. Alyssa called me the following Tuesday to schedule May's interview with Oliver. She explained that May wanted to meet him at a family therapy center that had a playroom designed for kids his age. The appointment was set for Thursday afternoon. I picked Oliver up from the school early and drove him to the center without telling him too much about what to expect. He seemed nervous in the car, asking if he was in trouble. I reassured him that he wasn't, that a nice lady just wanted to talk to him about how things were going. The center was in a converted house with a bright blue door and a garden out front. Oliver relaxed a little when he saw the playground equipment visible through the windows. May met us in the lobby wearing jeans and a cardigan, looking more like a teacher than a doctor. She introduced herself to Oliver and showed him the playroom filled with toys, art supplies, and games. She told me I could wait in the lobby and that they'd be done in about an hour. I sat in an uncomfortable chair reading the same magazine page over and over while imagining what they were talking about. When Oliver emerged, he looked calm and was carrying a drawing he'd made. May walked him out and told me she'd send her report to Alyssa within 2 weeks. Oliver chattered about the cool toys on the drive home, mentioning that May had asked him about his favorite things to do at my house and at his dad's house. He said she asked if he felt safe and happy in both places. That night, Alyssa called to say May had told her the interview went well, and that Oliver seemed well-adjusted and articulate for his age. The report would include Oliver's perspective on his relationships with both parents and his feelings about the recent changes in his routine. 3 weeks passed with Kyle sticking carefully to his supervised visitation schedule. He picked Oliver up on time, returned him on time, and sent polite text messages about school activities. Bianca was nowhere to be seen during pickups and drop-offs. Then Edward Penn called Alyssa on a Friday afternoon proposing a settlement. Kyle was willing to accept primary physical custody going to me in exchange for generous visitation rights and shared decision-making on major issues like education and medical care. Alyssa said it was clear they wanted to avoid another court hearing where more details about the Portugal plan might come out. She said Edward sounded tired and stressed, like he'd been dealing with difficult clients. Alyssa and I met at her office on Monday to discuss the settlement offer. She spread the proposed terms across her desk and walked me through each section. The offer gave me primary physical custody with Kyle having every other weekend, 1 weeknight dinner each week, alternating holidays, and 4 weeks during summer vacation. They wanted shared decision-making on major issues and reasonable phone contact with Oliver. Alyssa asked what I thought. I said I was inclined to accept if we could add stronger provisions about travel and relocation. I wanted it in writing that Kyle needed my consent for any travel outside our state and any change in Oliver's school or residence. Alyssa nodded and made notes about our counter-proposal. She said we had leverage because Judge Robertson was clearly unhappy with Kyle's judgment, and any trial would probably result in even more restrictive terms for him. We spent an hour crafting our response. Primary physical custody to me with Kyle having every other weekend from Friday evening to Sunday evening, plus Wednesday dinners from 5 to 8. Shared holidays on a rotating schedule. 4 weeks of summer vacation split into 2 2-week periods. The critical part was the travel and relocation clause requiring my written consent for any travel beyond 100 miles from our city, and any change in Oliver's school enrollment or primary residence. We also included a provision that custody arrangements could be reviewed in 2 years if both parents demonstrated sustained cooperation and circumstances changed significantly. Alyssa sent our counter-proposal to Edward Penn that afternoon. He called back 2 hours later, pushing back on the travel restrictions. Alyssa put him on speakerphone so I could hear. Edward argued that the travel clause was too restrictive, and that Kyle should be able to take Oliver on normal vacations without needing permission for every trip. Alyssa's voice turned cold and professional. She reminded Edward that his client had attempted to relocate Oliver to another country without any consent or notification. She pointed out that Judge Robertson had been disturbed enough by Kyle's judgment to order immediate custody modifications and a full evaluation. She said the judge was unlikely to be more lenient than our proposed terms given Kyle's demonstrated poor judgment and Bianca's continued influence over his decisions. Edward went quiet for a moment. Then he said he'd talk to his client and get back to us. The next day passed with no word. Then Thursday morning, Edward called Alyssa to say Kyle agreed to our terms. He sounded exhausted and said his client was worn down by the legal battle and ready to accept a reasonable settlement. The agreement included everything we'd asked for, including the 2-year review provision. Alyssa scheduled a final hearing with Judge Robertson to approve the settlement in 10 days. Meanwhile, May Browning completed her evaluation report. Alyssa obtained a copy even though we didn't technically need it anymore since Kyle had agreed to settle. She called me after reading it to summarize the findings. May's report confirmed that Oliver was strongly bonded with me, thriving in his current school and home environment, and would benefit from stability rather than major disruption. The report noted concerns about Bianca's boundary issues and her tendency to overstep parental authority. May also noted that Kyle appeared susceptible to Bianca's influence in ways that compromised his parental judgment. The report recommended primary physical custody with me and structured visitation for Kyle. Reading those professional conclusions validated everything I'd been fighting for. The final hearing arrived on a Wednesday morning. I wore a navy dress and arrived at the courthouse 30 minutes early. Kyle showed up with Edward looking nervous and tired. Bianca came too, sitting in the back row wearing a subdued outfit without any Portugal references. Judge Robertson reviewed our settlement agreement page by page, asking questions about specific provisions. Then she looked directly at Kyle and asked if he understood that he had violated his son's trust and his co-parents' rights by planning the Portugal move without consent. Kyle stood up and quietly acknowledged his mistakes. His voice was soft, and he looked genuinely sorry in a way I hadn't seen since our divorce. He said he got caught up in an opportunity that seemed exciting without thinking through how it would affect Oliver, or respecting my role as Oliver's mother. Judge Robertson nodded slowly and approved the settlement. But then she added her own warning. She said any future violation of the custody order would result in immediate suspension of Kyle's parenting time and potential contempt charges. She told Kyle that his son deserved better judgment from his father, and that Bianca's ambitions could not supersede Oliver's needs. Her voice was stern but not unkind. Then Judge Robertson did something unexpected. She addressed Bianca directly, even though Bianca wasn't a party to the custody case. The judge said that stepmothers can play important and positive roles in children's lives, but they must respect boundaries and defer to biological parents on major decisions. She said that overstepping those boundaries, as Bianca had done, creates conflict that ultimately harms the child. Bianca's face turned red, and she looked down at her hands. For the first time since this whole thing started, she seemed to grasp that her overreach had created this disaster. I stepped out into the courthouse hallway with Kyle, setting my phone timer for 5 minutes. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, like something inside him had finally broken down. His shoulders slumped forward, and he kept rubbing his face with both hands. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I let Bianca convince me that Portugal was this amazing opportunity for Oliver. I got caught up in her excitement about the tourism deal and the international school. I didn't think about what it would mean for him to be away from you for a year. I didn't think about how it would feel for you to find out the way you did." I crossed my arms and waited. He needed to say more than that. "I know I messed up," Kyle continued. "Not just with the Portugal thing, with everything. I let someone I've known less than a year make decisions about our son. I signed papers and paid deposits without talking to you. I packed his things like he was mine to take wherever I wanted." My timer buzzed. 5 minutes exactly. But I gave him another 30 seconds. "I want Oliver to have a good relationship with you," I said. "He needs his dad. But you have to earn back my trust, not with words, with consistent behavior over time. You follow the custody schedule exactly. You communicate respectfully about his activities and needs. You make decisions together with me, not around me." Kyle nodded slowly. "I understand. I'm on probation. Not just legally, but with you. I get it." We walked back to our cars separately. I didn't look back. Over the next few weeks, Kyle stuck to the new custody schedule like his life depended on it. He texted me updates about Oliver's homework and soccer practice. He asked before signing Oliver up for anything. He showed up exactly on time for pickups and drop-offs, not a minute late or early. Bianca was nowhere to be seen. Not at the exchanges, not at the school events, not in the background during video calls. Kyle mentioned once that she was traveling for work, but her Instagram activity had dropped to maybe 1 post per week. The photos looked different too. Less polished, fewer sponsored tags. Her follower count kept shrinking. I checked her profile one night after Oliver went to bed. She was down to 32,000 followers. The comments on her recent posts were mostly bots, or people asking what happened to her Portugal partnership. She'd stopped responding to anyone. Oliver adjusted faster than I expected. The first week after the final custody order, he seemed nervous during transitions between houses. But by week 3, he was back to his normal self. Happy, talkative, excited about his upcoming birthday party. One evening while we were making dinner together, he asked if Dad was okay. "What do you mean?" I stirred the pasta sauce and tried to keep my voice neutral. "He seems sad sometimes," Oliver said. "Like when we're watching TV or playing games. He gets this look on his face like he's thinking about something that makes him unhappy." I turned down the stove and knelt beside him. Grown-ups make mistakes sometimes. When we do, we have to deal with the consequences. That can be hard, and it can make us sad. But it doesn't mean anything about you. Your dad loves you very much. Did he make a mistake about Portugal? I chose my words carefully. He made some choices without thinking them through completely. Now he's working on making better choices. That's what matters. Oliver seemed satisfied with that answer. He went back to setting the table while humming a song from the school. 2 months after the final custody order, Louise called me on a Tuesday morning. "I heard something through the industry network," she said, "about Bianca and Kyle." I poured myself more coffee and sat down at the kitchen table. "What?" "They separated. Bianca moved back to her hometown somewhere in Ohio. Kyle got an apartment closer to your neighborhood." I felt a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated that their rushed marriage couldn't survive the consequences of their Portugal scheme. Part of me felt genuinely sad that Oliver had to deal with another family disruption so soon after the custody battle. "How long ago?" I asked. "Maybe 3 weeks. Kyle's been keeping it quiet. Apparently Bianca's influencer career never recovered after the Portuguese tourism board dropped her. The other brands started pulling out when they realized her engagement numbers were fake. She was making almost nothing by the end. And Kyle? I think he finally saw who she really was. The Portugal thing wasn't about Oliver's education or cultural opportunities. It was about her trying to rebuild her brand on his back. When that fell apart, so did they. I thanked Louise for the information and hung up. Oliver would need to know eventually, but I'd wait for Kyle to tell him first. Kyle asked to meet for coffee the following week. I agreed, but picked a busy Starbucks near my office during lunch hour. Public place, time limit, easy exit if needed. He was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees. He'd remembered how I took mine. That was something, at least. "Thanks for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "You said you wanted to talk about co-parenting going forward." Kyle nodded and wrapped both hands around his cup. "Bianca and I separated. I'm sure you heard. Louise mentioned it. I should have told you sooner. I just needed time to figure out how to explain it to Oliver." He paused. Her influence made me lose sight of what mattered. The Portugal plan, the way she talked about you, the way she inserted herself into every part of Oliver's life. I let all of that cloud my judgment as a father. I sipped my coffee and waited. "I'm committed to rebuilding your trust," Kyle continued. "I want to be a better father to Oliver. Even if that means less exciting adventures than Portugal would have been. Even if that means admitting I was wrong and working hard to prove I've changed." "Words are nice," I said, "but they don't mean much without sustained changed behavior. You've been doing well with the custody schedule. Keep doing that. Keep communicating respectfully. Keep putting Oliver first instead of whatever new person enters your life." "I will. We can try monthly co-parent meetings," I offered. "Sit down together, discuss Oliver's progress, coordinate schedules, start fresh with realistic expectations about cooperation. But if you slip back into old patterns, we're done trying." Kyle agreed immediately. We finished our coffees and talked logistics for 20 minutes. It felt almost normal. Almost like the cooperative co-parenting we'd managed before Bianca entered the picture. 3 weeks later, Oliver's teacher sent me an email that made me smile for the first time in months. Oliver was thriving academically. His reading scores had jumped 2 grade levels. His math work showed strong problem-solving skills. He was participating actively in class discussions and had developed close friendships with several classmates. The teacher noted that he seemed more settled and focused than he'd been earlier in the year. I forwarded the email to Kyle with a simple message. "Thought you'd want to see this." He responded within minutes. "This is wonderful. Thank you for sharing. He's doing so well." For the first time since the Portugal disaster, I felt like we might actually figure out this co-parenting thing properly. Thanksgiving arrived faster than I expected. Kyle and I worked out a schedule where Oliver would spend the morning with me and evening with him. The transition happened at Kyle's new apartment, which was only 15 minutes from my house. Oliver was excited about celebrating twice. He helped me make pumpkin pie in the morning. Then we watched the parade together on the couch. When it was time to go to Kyle's, I walked him to the door. Kyle answered, looking nervous but genuine. "Happy Thanksgiving." "You too." Oliver ran inside to see what his dad had cooked. Kyle and I stood in the doorway for an awkward moment. "He did great in his school play last week," I said. Remembered all his lines. "I heard. I'm sorry I missed it. Work conflict, I couldn't move. There will be other plays." "Yeah." Kyle smiled slightly. "There will be." I left feeling something close to hope. Not for us, but for Oliver. For the possibility that his parents could actually be in the same room without tension. That night, after Oliver was asleep in his bed, I opened a dating app for the first time in 3 years. I'd been so focused on avoiding conflict, on keeping peace with Kyle, on not rocking the boat, that I'd forgotten to prioritize my own life and judgment. The Portugal situation taught me that avoiding all conflict isn't the same as doing what's right. Sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you have to use every resource available. Sometimes you have to trust your instincts even when it means disrupting the false peace you've carefully maintained. I scrolled through a few profiles without much interest. Stephen had joked that any future partners would need to pass his federal prosecutor screening. The thought made me laugh out loud in my quiet living room. I had my family's support. I had Oliver safe and thriving in his room down the hall. I had a custody arrangement that protected his well-being. I had proven to myself that I could fight when it mattered. Everything else could wait. A package arrived at my door 2 weeks later with Kyle's return address. Inside was a workbook from the co-parenting class, pages marked with sticky notes. He'd highlighted sections about putting kids first and managing conflict without making them feel caught in the middle. A handwritten note fell out when I opened it. "Thought you might find this useful too. Some of this hit hard. I'm working on being better." I flipped through the marked pages. One section talked about how parents sometimes make decisions based on what feels exciting or validating to them, instead of what their child actually needs. Kyle had underlined that sentence twice. Another highlighted passage discussed how new partners can influence judgment when parents are eager to prove they've moved on successfully. I texted him a simple thank you. The gesture felt small but real. Not a grand apology or dramatic change, just evidence he was actually trying to understand where things went wrong. 3 months passed in a surprisingly stable rhythm. Oliver thrived with the new routine, his grades improved, and his teacher sent home notes about his increased confidence in class. Then one evening while I was making dinner, he wandered into the kitchen looking thoughtful. He started arranging his toy cars on the counter in careful lines, which he always did when something was on his mind. Can I ask you something? I turned down the stove. Of course. I was wondering if maybe I could video call Bianca sometime. I know she messed up with the whole Portugal thing, and I'm really glad I didn't have to move, but I kind of miss her. My hand froze on the spatula. Of all the things I expected him to say, that wasn't on the list. You miss her? She used to help me with my Spanish homework, and she taught me how to make those Portuguese egg tarts. Remember when we made those? I did remember. They'd turned out pretty good, actually. That's very mature of you to say. Can I think about it and talk to your dad first? Oliver nodded and went back to lining up his cars. I called Kyle that night after Oliver was asleep. He sounded as surprised as I felt. He asked you the same thing? Last weekend. I told him I needed to discuss it with you first. We talked for nearly an hour, working through the logistics. Supervised calls only. Bianca would need to agree to clear boundaries. No undermining the custody arrangement. No posting about Oliver online. No discussions about Portugal or what could have been. Kyle said he'd reach out to Bianca and see if she was willing to follow those rules. Bianca contacted Kyle 3 days later, asking if she could apologize to me directly. I stared at the text Kyle forwarded showing her request. My first instinct was to say no, but I called Alyssa first. What do you think? Alyssa was quiet for a moment. Legally, you don't owe her anything. Personally, if she's genuinely changed and Oliver wants some connection with her, it might help everyone move forward. But keep it brief, and don't agree to anything without running it by me first. I told Kyle I'd do one phone call. 15 minutes maximum. Bianca called the next evening while Oliver was at his friend's house. Her voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. Less confident. Thank you for taking my call. I know you have every reason to hang up on me. I didn't say anything, just waited. I need you to know how sorry I am. I got completely caught up in my own plans and excitement. I convinced myself that what I wanted was best for Oliver too. I didn't respect your role as his mother. I didn't even really think about what he needed versus what would make my life more interesting. She took a shaky breath. The Portugal thing was my dream, not his. I pushed Kyle into it because I wanted this perfect Instagram life with a ready-made family in Europe. I was selfish and wrong, and I'm genuinely sorry. I walked to the window and looked out at Oliver's bike in the driveway. You tried to take my son to another country. I know. I can't take that back. I can't fix how badly I screwed up. But I want you to know I've spent these months thinking about what I did and why I did it. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to hear that I understand now how wrong I was. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds. Oliver asked if he could video call you. He misses you. Bianca made a small sound like she might cry. He does? Yeah. Which surprised me too. But he's a good kid with a big heart. If you want any kind of relationship with him going forward, it has to be on my terms. You support the custody arrangement. You respect boundaries. You never, ever try to override my decisions as his mother again. I will. I promise. I'm so grateful you're even considering this. I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because Oliver asked, and because cutting you out completely when he doesn't want that wouldn't be fair to him. But one wrong move and you're done. Understand? I understand. Thank you. Seriously, thank you for not completely shutting me out when you have every right to. I ended the call and sat on the couch for a while. Accepting her apology didn't mean forgetting what happened. It just meant I was choosing to let Oliver have a relationship with someone he cared about, within very strict limits that protected him. Oliver's 9th birthday arrived in early March. Kyle and I met 3 times beforehand to plan the party, splitting the guest list, coordinating the trampoline park reservation, and dividing up food responsibilities. The morning of the party, I arrived at the trampoline park with 24 cupcakes and juice boxes, while Kyle pulled up with pizza and plates. We set up the party room together, hanging decorations and arranging tables. Other parents started arriving with their kids. Several divorced parents I knew from the school events watched Kyle and me working together with obvious surprise. One mom pulled me aside while the kids were jumping. I have to say, you two are handling this divorce thing really well. My ex and I can barely be in the same room. I glanced over at Kyle, who was helping a kid with his jump socks. It took some work to get here. We had a rough patch. Well, whatever you're doing, it's working. Your son seems really happy. Oliver bounced over, sweaty and grinning, to show me a trick he learned. Kyle came over too, and we both watched him demonstrate his flip attempt. For a moment, standing there with Kyle cheering on our son, I felt something settle inside me. Not the false peace from before when I avoided all conflict. Something more solid. We'd been through fire and come out the other side with a better understanding of how to actually co-parent, instead of just pretending everything was fine. 2 weeks later, my boss called me into her office. I'd been working on a major project for months, pulling extra hours and taking on additional responsibilities. She smiled as I sat down. I wanted to let you know the promotion came through. You'll be moving to senior manager effective next month with a salary increase. I felt my face break into a huge smile. The extra money meant I could finally replace my aging car and maybe even take Oliver on a real vacation this summer. More than that, it felt like proof that I'd made the right choice. Fighting for Oliver, standing up to Bianca's dismissive attitude about my suburban life, using every resource I had to protect my son. All of it had been worth it. When I picked Oliver up from Kyle's that evening, I mentioned the promotion casually while loading his backpack into my car. Kyle stopped and turned to face me. That's great. Really. Congratulations. You've been working toward that for a long time. His tone was genuine. No trace of the competitive edge that used to creep into his voice when I had professional success during our marriage. Thanks. It'll help with some things I've been putting off. You deserve it. He paused. You're doing a great job with everything. Work, Oliver, all of it. I nodded, not sure what to say to this new version of Kyle who could celebrate my wins without making it about himself. That weekend, Oliver was putting away his laundry when he made one of those casual kid comments that reveals what they're really thinking. Dad's apartment is nice. He got me my own room and everything. I kept folding towels, trying to sound neutral. That's good. But I'm glad my main home is here with you. I like having all my stuff in one place where it stays. Dad's room is more like for visiting. Relief washed through me. Not because I wanted Oliver to prefer one parent over the other, but because he felt secure. He wasn't torn or confused about where he belonged. He had his home base and his visiting place, and that structure made sense to him. I'm glad you feel comfortable here. Yeah. Plus, all my best stuff is here. And you make better pancakes than Dad. I laughed. Don't tell him that. I won't, but it's true. He grabbed his folded clothes and headed to his room, completely unaware that his simple statement had just validated every hard decision I'd made over the past 6 months. Stephen called on a Friday afternoon with an invitation. We're going to the lake house next weekend. You and Oliver should come. The kids would love it and you could use a break. I hadn't been to their lake house in over a year. Are you sure? That's a lot of people. We're sure. Pack some clothes and plan to stay 2 nights. There's fishing, swimming, kayaking. Oliver will have a blast with his cousins. The weekend turned out exactly as Stephen promised. Oliver spent hours on the dock with Stephen teaching him to cast a fishing line. He caught 3 small bass and insisted on taking photos with each one before releasing them back. My sister-in-law made huge breakfasts, and we all ate on the deck overlooking the water. The kids swam until they were exhausted, then roasted marshmallows while the adults talked around the fire pit. Watching Oliver run around with his cousins, completely carefree and happy, I felt grateful all over again for family who showed up when things got hard. Stephen had made one phone call that brought federal agents to Kyle's office. My sister-in-law had taken Oliver for playdates during the worst of the custody battle. They'd supported me without judgment or hesitation. These were the relationships that mattered. The ones that held steady when everything else fell apart. 6 months after the custody battle ended, I was leaving the grocery store when someone called my name. The school secretary stood by her car, looking uncertain. I walked over. Hi. I've been hoping to run into you. I wanted to apologize for that phone call about the visa. I worried I caused a lot of family drama. I set my grocery bags down. You didn't cause anything. You potentially saved Oliver from being taken to another country without my knowledge or consent. I should have thanked you months ago. Her eyes filled with tears. I felt so guilty. I kept thinking maybe I should have just ignored the paperwork issue. Please don't feel guilty. That call gave me a chance to stop something that would have been really traumatic for my son. You did exactly the right thing by following protocol and contacting both parents. She wiped her eyes. How is Oliver doing? He's great. Thriving, actually. The whole situation worked out better than it could have. I'm so glad. I've been worried about him. We talked for a few more minutes before going our separate ways. Driving home, I thought about how many people had played small but crucial roles in protecting Oliver. The secretary who made that call. Stephen, who knew exactly who to contact. Louise, who exposed Bianca's fake followers. Alyssa, who fought hard in court. Even May, whose evaluation backed up what I already knew about what Oliver needed. Kyle and I met at a coffee shop for our 6-month check-in, a scheduled review of how the custody arrangement was working. He ordered his usual black coffee while I got tea. We sat at a corner table with notebooks and calendars spread between us. Summer schedule first? Kyle pulled out his calendar. I've got 2 weeks of vacation saved. I was thinking first 2 weeks of July if that works for you. That works. I'll take him the last week of July and first week of August. My promotion came with extra vacation days. We went through the details methodically. Camp schedules, doctor appointments, back to the school shopping. The conversation stayed focused on Oliver the entire time. No tension, no hidden agendas, no resentment bubbling under the surface. Just 2 parents working out logistics for their kid. He mentioned wanting to try soccer this fall, Kyle said. Yeah, he's been talking about that. The league practices Tuesday and Thursday evenings. I can do Tuesdays. You take Thursdays? That works. Kyle closed his calendar and looked at me directly. This is working. The new arrangement. Better than before, actually. I nodded. We're being more honest now. Before Portugal, we were just avoiding difficult conversations and pretending that meant we were co-parenting well. Yeah, I think I confused keeping the peace with actually doing right by Oliver. We both did. I finished my tea. But we're figuring it out now. That's what matters. We left the coffee shop and walked to our separate cars. The conversation had been productive, focused entirely on Oliver's needs and surprisingly easy. We'd achieved something more valuable than the false peace we maintained before. We'd built a functional co-parenting relationship based on honesty instead of avoidance. A week later, Oliver sat at the kitchen table doing homework when he looked up at me with that serious expression he gets when something's been bothering him. He set down his pencil and asked why he didn't see Bianca anymore. I pulled out the chair next to him and sat down, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that change how relationships work, I told him, but that doesn't mean people stopped caring. Bianca had some things she needed to figure out in her own life, and sometimes that means stepping back from other people for a while. Oliver nodded slowly, processing this, then asked if it was because of the Portugal thing. I admitted that was part of it, that Bianca had made some decisions without thinking them through completely, and now she was working on understanding why that wasn't okay. Kyle called that evening during his scheduled phone time with Oliver, and afterward he asked if he could talk to me for a minute. Oliver handed me the phone and went back to his room. Kyle said Oliver had asked him the same question about Bianca, and he wanted to make sure we were giving consistent answers. I told him what I'd said, and Kyle agreed that was the right approach. He added that he'd told Oliver essentially the same thing, that adults sometimes need space to work on themselves, and that Oliver didn't do anything wrong. The conversation lasted maybe 3 minutes, but it felt significant that we'd handled it together without drama or blame. The summer camp catalog arrived in the mail 2 days later, and Oliver flipped through it excitedly at breakfast. He pointed to a science and nature program that ran for 3 weeks in July, with activities like hiking, stream ecology, and building solar ovens. The cost was reasonable, and the schedule worked perfectly with my job, so I told him we could sign him up if he wanted. Oliver asked if it would mess up Dad's summertime with him, clearly not wanting to cause problems. I texted Kyle that afternoon with the camp dates and asked if we could adjust his summer visitation to work around it. He responded within an hour saying that sounded great, and he'd take Oliver the last 2 weeks of August instead. No argument, no negotiation, just easy cooperation on a decision that directly affected our son's summer. I enrolled Oliver in the camp program that evening, and he was so excited he called Kyle immediately to tell him about all the activities. Listening to him describe the fossil hunting expedition and astronomy night, I realized how different this felt from the Portugal situation where Kyle made major plans without even mentioning them to me. This was what co-parenting should look like. Both of us making space for what Oliver wanted and needed, rather than imposing our own agendas. The school year ended 3 weeks later with an awards ceremony in the gymnasium. Oliver brought home his report card the day before. All excellent marks and a note from his teacher praising his curiosity and kindness with other students. At the ceremony, Kyle and I sat together in the bleachers while Oliver fidgeted in his seat with the other third graders on the gym floor. When the principal called his name for academic achievement, we both stood up clapping as Oliver walked across the floor to accept his certificate. He looked up at us in the stands and waved, his face bright with pride. Kyle leaned over and said Oliver was doing so well, and I agreed, feeling genuinely proud not just of our son, but of how we'd managed to get here. The past 6 months had been hard, full of legal battles and difficult conversations and rebuilding trust that got shattered. But sitting there watching Oliver smile as teachers praised his hard work, I felt like we'd made the right choices. We'd put his well-being first even when it meant conflict and consequences, and he was thriving because of it. That evening I tucked Oliver into bed in his room, the same room that had nearly been packed up in boxes labeled Lisboa. He was tired from the excitement of the awards ceremony, but happy, talking about summer camp and what he wanted to do with Dad in August. I listened to his plans and felt this deep sense of gratitude that my instinct to fight back had protected him from such a disruptive mistake. Our life wasn't perfect or particularly dramatic, just the normal routine of school and work and weekend soccer games, but it was stable and loving and genuinely ours, built on honest communication and mutual respect rather than false peace. I thought about Bianca's contempt for this suburban existence, her certainty that European culture was somehow superior to strip malls and chain restaurants. She'd been so focused on sophisticated experiences that she'd completely missed what actually mattered, the daily steadiness that lets a kid feel secure enough to thrive. Oliver fell asleep mid-sentence about the camp's hiking trails, and I sat there for another minute just watching him breathe. I wouldn't trade this ordinary, unglamorous life for anything Bianca had considered more culturally sophisticated, because this was real, and it was ours, and it was exactly what Oliver needed.